Flight attendants, both past and present. What's the most entitled behavior you've seen from a passenger? My girlfriend's mom is a flight attendant. One time a woman got quite angry because her daughter spilled apple juice all over and there was not a clothes dryer on the plane for her daughter's sweater. Might have suggested she opened the door and hold it aloft for it to dry. Not an attendant but was on a flight with really bad turbulence. It went on for about 10 minutes, then the old lady next to me reaches up and presses her button. Attendant walks over to see if the woman is okay. The woman begins to yell at the attendant for the rough flight and that she's been flying her whole life and clearly the pilot has no idea what he's doing. The stewardess just walked away. Mayo. I imagined the attendant just walking off mid-sentence with a tired-eyed Jeff face. Not an attendant but once got stranded at Newark for 22 hours. After our flight had an unfixable fault and was cancelled late at night. We got put up in a hotel but understandably by the time the new flight rolled around, earliest they could fit in a new flight, everyone was quite tired and agitated. As we are waiting to board the new flight, the flight attendant announces they would be boarding people with additional needs and families with young children first, followed by first class, then premium economy etc etc. All pretty standard stuff. Obviously it can take a bit longer for people in wheelchairs to board, so makes sense for them to go on first. It's common on most airlines I believe. Anyway, this business dude races to the front of the crowd and starts yelling at the attendant, saying it was already disgusting that he had lost a day due to their incompetence and now he had to wait even longer despite being a first class passenger and paying $$ every year to fly with them. The worst part is he's looking at others in the crowd to back him up. Like it's perfectly reasonable to scream at this woman who, like us, had also been stranded and had most likely had very little sleep and was doing her best to do her job in this difficult situation. But she was awesome. Without missing a beat, she smiled and nodded and said okay sir, then made a big point of leaning into her mic and telling the waiting line of people in wheelchairs and mothers with babies that this gentleman needed to board before them and could they please wait. Literally every single person at the gate is looking at this guy with disgust as he tries to backtrack and say he doesn't mind waiting for the first group. But the attendant says no, you made yourself quite clear, let's get you boarded. The others will have to wait. He is humiliated as he sheepishly walks by. She handled it perfectly. Former flight attendant here. I remember flying into SFO and going through the final walkthrough asking everyone to wake up, buckle up, headrests forward, tray tables up, and collect trash. Halfway through, the pilot said flight attendants, be seated immediately, which indicates a lot of upcoming turbulence. So I quickly started to trot through with my trash bag to my jump seat when a man yelled hey. I was a few rows past him and he had hit cup and wet nap in his hand. I quickly said I have to sit down and turned back towards the back galley. I then felt something hit me. I looked back and he had thrown his trash at me and was staring at me like the little bee he was. I heard a few people gasp and everyone in the last 8 rows or so was tuned into the drama. I pick up the trash, walked over to his row, and said I am sorry, I cannot take trash right now. The pilot has indicated that I need to sit down, and toss the trash back on his lap. He just kind of stared at me with a defiant look in his face and held out the trash again as if I was going to take it. I turned and left and I heard him yell a few more times but he didn't throw anything. I have had a lot of douchebag thunderkind passengers before, but for some reason, that one sticks out. Not one specific passenger but a type of behavior I've unfortunately seen too much of. Couple will book separate seats. The man in a premium economy seat with extra leg room. The woman in a normal economy seat. The woman will then play the sad sack and ask another passenger to give up their comfy seat so they can sit together. If the other passenger refuses, usually because they paid extra and literally don't fit in a regular seat, some will even complain to the crew to make them move the other passenger, and all this to save a few bucks on the second premium seat. Mid-90s, there was this kid in customs, Toronto to Houston flight, who was going nuts. He driving people crazy in the departure area. On the flight, he had a full-sized metal Tonka truck that he was running up and down the aisle with. He smacked me on the head and nearly hit my mom in front of me. I grabbed it before he could hit my very frail and on blood thin as mom. I gave it to a crew member who refused to give it back to the family. The family refused to seat him until it was announced that there would be no food or beverage service until the aisle was cleared. Another woman grabbed the kid and returned him to his family. They let him run loose again as soon as service was over. Finally, someone from the cockpit had to come back and tell the family we couldn't start the landing approach until the brat was in his seat. They put him in his seat, screaming bloody murder. As soon as descent started, they let him up and he was running up and down the aisle as we landed. The family was so dense that when the captain ordered everyone to stay in their dang seats and that only families with small children would be allowed to deplane at first, they smirked their way down the aisle. Mum walked with a cane, and the crush getting off was hard for her. Since we were home, we just waited till the aisles were clear. When we got off, you could hear the kid screaming one stroke two-way down the jetway. A police officer was holding him and the rest of the family, I'm guessing mom, dad, and 2 grandparents, were in handcuffs. I once watched a very well-dressed businessman have an epic toddler-level tantrum at a check-in counter when he was advised his flight was delayed due to fog. He literally screamed and jumped up and down and demanded that the airline better do something about it, or else the guy working behind the counter just smirked and suggested that business guy was welcome to go outside and try and flap the fog away with his arms. Entire queue burst out laughing. The guy working behind the counter just smirked and suggested that business guy was welcome to go outside and try and flap the fog away with his arms. This guy deserves an Oscar or something. I was laughing out loud when I read this. I was a kid flying out to Utah to start my teen tour. About halfway through the flight, departing out of NY, the captain got on the speaker to announce an engine had failed and we needed to make an emergency landing in Chicago. Needless to say, we got a little concerned, except for one passenger, who stormed up to the flight attendant and explained she was a nanny and needed to get to Utah to attend to the children she took care of. I'm not exactly sure what she was hoping, that the pilot, upon hearing that a babysitter was on board, would risk the lives of everyone to fly us all through, or that the flight attendant would be so moved by this story that she would climb out on the wing and repair the engine mid-flight. Alas, there was no emergency jetpack to give this passenger to blast away from the plane to get to Utah on time, and she was told to sit down. Was on a Vegas to Boston flight when a passenger passed away in his sleep. The whole situation was heartbreaking and the flight attendants were clearly shaken. We stopped in NY for emergency personnel to attend to him. The whole process was very quick and the pilot and staff handled it like champs. Just as we were about to take off, a guy in the front row asks the attendant if we would all get free drinks due to the inconvenience. I've never wanted to yell at a stranger so much in my life. The next day I get an email from the airline with a $50 voucher to apologize. I didn't want it nor expect it and wondered if it happened because some jackass complained about the diversion. I did tweet the airline to compliment the staff. Didn't say what the situation was, just the flight number. I figured they'd figure it out on their handling of the situation. They deserve it. Not a flight attendant but fly a lot, and I was on a plane where half the plane were ignoring the rules and stuff. When we touched down, these people immediately got up walking around and started taking their bags out of the overheads. Mind you, the plane hasn't parked, it's just literally touched the floor of the landing strip, so it's still moving and it's dangerous for half the people on the plane to be fricking around, and even worse, taking all their heavy bags down above everyone else's. Heads down, the flight attendants are now desperately trying to get these people to sit down until the plane stops moving, and some people were waving their hands at them dismissively. I think the captain heard the commotion and the flight attendants half yelling because all of a sudden the plane did a very abrupt stop which knocked over all the people standing up and then continued to park. The flight attendant then said, "This is exactly why we have rules, LOL. I remember being an unruly little kid who wouldn't put my seatbelt on in the car, so my mother would slam on the brakes making my face hit the seat, and this is exactly how I imagine the situation you just described." I'm a passenger, not a flight attendant, but it's a good story nonetheless. I was on a flight from NYC to PDX. Only empty seat was next to me, a middle seat. Bulkhead, but the kind where there isn't a wall, just the first class seats in front of us. Door is about to close when a large sweaty man comes running onto the plane to claim the empty seat. He was carrying a full-size pizza box. All overhead bins were already closed. and full, but that didn't stop him from proceeding to open them to find a place to stash his pizza. The stewardess kindly informed him that he couldn't put his pizza in an overhead bin, but it'll get stepped on, he gruffly informs her. She proceeded to tell him to take his seat and put the pizza in front of him. He told her that he flies with pizza all the time and has never been treated this way. He persisted, but as their argument was getting pretty heated, he finally succumbed and put the pizza under the seat in front of him and sat down. The stewardesses have now started the safety video demonstration and he pulls out a flip phone and proceeds to make a call. I can tell he's going through menus, so I'm thinking he's calling Delta to complain. Nope. Turns out to be his landline phone company. He had been late paying his bill and was trying to get them to waive the late fee. They wouldn't. He is arguing with them. Plane has pushed back from the gate and is headed toward the runway at this point. Stewardess comes over and tells him he needs to put his phone away now. He motions with his hand to say 1 minute. No, sir, it needs to be put away now. He flips it shut dramatically mid-sentence and puts it in his pocket. Stewardess is back to the front of the plane. He then decides to stretch. I'm pretty much plastered to the wall trying to stay out of his way as he extends his arms up, and then to the side, etc. And then twists in his seat back and forth, clearly agitated. He then extends his arms up, stretches out his fingers and proceeds to crack his knuckles very expressively one at a time, sorta like a primary school bully would do on the playground before they were gonna kick your butt. In that whole knuckle cracking process he flips a middle finger toward the flight attendant. I didn't notice her reaction as I was just waiting to get this 6-hour flight underway and over with. Next thing I know, I can tell we're pulling back into the gate. Flight attendants prepare for arrival and cross-check message. Door opens. Cockpit door opens. Captain comes to our row. Sir, I understand you were harassing my flight attendant. I need you to leave the plane now. The pizza man attempted to argue and even ask me and the other neighboring passenger if we had witnessed anything. Clearly the pilot wasn't budging on his decision, so the guy got his pizza off the floor and left the plane. Door closed and we departed. Empty seat next to me. I'm glad that story had a happy ending. That would have been a miserable 6 hours. I had someone have a meltdown because I had to have them properly stow their wedding dress. The thing was massive and spilling into the aisle, blocking seats of the entire row. They may have had to pay the hotel to get the wrinkles out, but I likely saved them from shoe prints and beverage cart rollers going back and forth over it. Still, she was in tears and I was not going to risk other safety, including my own. I once flew from Chicago to Israel, very long flight with a stop in the middle, with a woman who didn't seem to understand that everyone around her was in the same situation she was in. She dropped a number of passive-aggressive gems over the course of our day together, but the worst one was right when we were being seated for the first leg. The plane was one of those 3x5x3 setups, with aisles on each side of the 5-seat section, and this woman was seated in the middle of the 5-seat section. But you can't seat me in the middle. What if I need to get up and walk around and the people next to me are asleep? I'll be very uncomfortable for this whole flight. Whoa, lady, you figured out why flying kind of sucks all by yourself. Now sit down and start pretending you're not here like the rest of us. Currently a FA flying 5 years for a legacy carrier. I have a few that pop into my head. One was I was working a quick turn at the end of a 3-day and we had a medical emergency in first class where a passenger passed out. We had to give him CPR and hook him up to a need, so 2 of us were with the man and the other FA was paging a doctor and communicating with the captain. While this was going on, a passenger in the first row of main cabin, who can clearly see everything going on, kept paging us for a Coke and getting very upset that we wouldn't serve him. Finally a commuting FA stepped in for us and had a word with him. Another one was actually my last trip, when a woman who boarded towards the end sitting in row 10A who left her bag in the aisle blocking everyone else trying to get on because she was looking for a place for her bag. She found a spot towards the back and put her hand in the air and started snapping and hollering at me to get her bag for her. I went up to her and told her to get her bag out of the aisle. She got in my face and demanded that I needed to put it up, which I told her I could not lift her bag for her. She threw a fit. Finally a nice gentleman helped her. Anyways, after boarding she accused me of stealing her fur scarf. I didn't. Then she called me a little blonde bee. She was removed. I had a lady another time get mad at me because I wouldn't give her my personal food I brought from home and paid for with my own money. She said she was hungry and she needed it. No. Another flight I had man and his small kid on a flight and he during boarding asked me for one of the first class meals I was preparing and I asked where he was sitting. Once he said a row in main cabin. I told him I'm sorry but these are for first class but we have food for purchase in main cabin. He then told me that his kid was hungry and demanded that we give him free food. I kept saying I'm sorry sure but the food is for purchase. He didn't think it was fair that he had to pay for food because he had a hungry kid. Anytime I see was removed, I'm filled with a little flush of satisfaction, knowing the buttholes didn't win this time. I'm 6 tall, with most of the length in my legs, and I fly a lot so I've run into a douche or two. Almost every plane I get in, my knees are already touching the seat in front of me. If the person in front of me reclines, the only way for me to sit is to straighten out my legs and shoot them underneath the seat in front of me. I was probably 16, still 6 feet, and the guy in front of me couldn't have been more than 24. He reclines and his seat practically hits me in the chest. I could smell his hair. He was so close. We asked him to put the seat up a bit, but he declined. The seat was clearly broken and reclined a good 6 inches past the other seats in his row, so we called over the flight attendant. She also saw the problem and asked him to put his seat up and told him it was broken. He said no, and she said there was nothing else she could do. Great, thanks. Luckily my mom is the pack everything you may need on a plane mom, so I get an idea. I start eating pretzels with my mouth wide open and get crumbs all over his head and shoulders. He doesn't notice until the crumbs are bouncing off his shoulder crumbs and into his lap. It was gross. He turns around with a look of disgust and asks me to stop. I got great pleasure in telling him no and showing him the rest of the bag of pretzels I had to eat over him. He put the seat up. Sorry, these pretzels are broken. The seat switch scam, SSS, has happened to me more times than it should have. I am a college student and thus naturally people, especially couples with babies, think that it would be much easier to force me into switching. There was this one time I was on a really long flight from Chicago to India. I usually never haggle much about seat and I'm pretty cool about switching if people ask me for it. I have this crappy quality of trying to avoid conflict in any way possible. This time I was fortunate enough to get one of those front seat with a lot of legroom. I knew this seemed too good to be true and at any moment a couple with a baby would request for the seat, to which I will cave. Needless to say, minutes later, this couple came up to me with the flight attendant, asking me to switch because I had a baby and the father was sitting next to me. The mother had a middle seat way back into the plane for a very long flight. Although I was hesitant, but with 3 people awkwardly waiting on me to say yes, I eventually caved. As I was moving my stuff, one of my small empty plastic bottles fell from my bag and nearly hit the father. Now, you have to understand this was one of those light plastic water bottle that could barely hurt if you tried to hit someone with it, let alone when it falls from the bag. But for some reason that angered the father into believing that it could have somehow seriously injured their baby. Even after apologizing to him for a solid minute, he kept shouting at me about how careless I was and that I need to learn plane etiquette. That just did it for me. I told him that I was no longer comfortable with the switch and just went back to my seat and pretended super hard to fall asleep. The entire flight he did try his best to annoy me, fighting me on the handrest, making it hard for me to move around etc. But I never felt so good about my plane etiquette. My mom was a flight attendant in her 20s. Asked her for a story. Her first week flying, there was a group of drunk men on the flight. At one point when returning to quiet them down again, one of the fellows had his wang out on full display for her in all its flaccid glory. He says to him very politely and a bit taken aback, "Why don't you put that away now?" And this drunken man flat out says to her, "Why don't you put it away for me?" with the most revolting smug smile on his face. My mom says, in her exact words, "I'd be happy to do that for you, but you'd never be able to use it again." Seems like an arthapant, but my mom has always had the most ridiculous stories that always turn out to be true. I'll take her word for the story. This sounds like a pretty realistic situation, Imo. currently on an airplane and saw a man berate the flight attendant because they let employees of the airline board before the customers. He was so angry because he paid for business select. They didn't pay for crap, so why are they boarding before me? Flight attendant responded with its company policy. Many are actually working and just need to get to the airport they'll be leaving from. And there's also only 3 on the flight, so what's the big deal anyway? He continued to whine and complain to her for another 10 minutes or so. All because now there were only 140 seats to choose from instead of 143. Boo-hoo sad. I use Southwest to commute all the time. I always take the window in the last row. You know, the crappy narrow seat that doesn't recline that no passenger wants. First one on, last one off. I've never seen another employee take any of the good seats. Flying in and out of DC, we always have air marshals. One time the agents let them down early. When the first passengers started arriving, a wealthy looking older couple came on and the woman started demanding to know who those men were that boarded before them. Her husband claimed they paid extra to be the first passengers on board, which is absurd because we always let wheelchair passengers and other specials down first. So I calmly explained to her that they were invited down by the captain because they were veterans in the Wounded Warrior Project. That shut her right up for the rest of the flight. I can't imagine the mindset that allows a person to think they are so entitled they deserve to sit down on a crappy airplane seat before any other person. Had a passenger a couple of rows in front of me aggressively asking the attendant for alcohol. We were still loading at the time. He was warned twice. Just as we were pushing back from the gate, he was given his final warning by the senior attendant. As she walked away, he swore at her. She turned round and told him we were going back to the gate and he was getting off. And we did. 20 minutes for his luggage to go and we were off again. I congratulated her at the end and emailed BA to say how well I thought she had handled it. If you don't stop yelling, I will turn this plane around. Just a passenger on Southwest with no assigned seats. I just love when a moment her 4 kids are last to board a full flight and each kid is carrying a bag of McDonald's. The mom starts shouting that she and her kids need to sit together and people who boarded the plane 20 minutes ago need to move. I would love to shout back, no, you needed to pack sandwiches and snacks and have been in line during family boarding. I freaking hate Southwest just for that reason. I've seen people hold entire rows for their family who's in boarding group Z. Passenger tale. I was on a flight from the UK to Ibiza with a group of close friends, flying out for a friend's wedding. We were looking forward to the flight until we took our seats and heard some really overbearing, clearly inebriated guys taking their seats behind us. They must have been in their mid to late 20s. One of them was actually being carried by 2 friends and lulling his head. As the plane took off, said pisshead threw up all over himself and his friends were in hysterics. We were all openly in shock and disgusted that someone that drunk could be allowed on a plane and that he'd literally chundered all over himself. It smelt vile. It must have been about 10 minutes later when 2 of the guys, the party totaled like 7/8 and they were all sat in a line, got into a drunken argument and one of them got up and starting strutting to another seat while we were still taking off. Seatbelt lights on. The air stewardess came over to him and explained that he couldn't move seats and he needed to move back once the seatbelt sign went off. He refused to move but started chatting her up and she went along with it. The light goes off and then the other friend, argument friend, gets out of his seat and approaches the guy who moved. The next thing you know they're having a drunken fight. Physical. In the aisle. Rolling around on the floor and I swear to God you could feel the plane moving slightly with it. People around were trying to stand up and leave their seats to get away from them. The stewardesses pulled them apart and eventually got them both to sit back down in separate seats. But I just remember how the stewardesses kept flirting back with them to keep the peace. I couldn't believe that the plane didn't turn around and that we then carried on with these absolute idiots on board. That they were even allowed to board in the first place. I've not flown with Ryanair since. As soon as you said UK to Ibiza, I knew it was going to be a Ryanair flight full of sea. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.